Okay, so now you've gotten through the create. Now we're going to install some software so that you can do the environment, create the environment in your local computer. And of course, what we have to talk about just for a moment is that we're probably not all using the same operating system. So for me, my main operating system is a Mac. I'm working today on a Windows because most students I've found, or most people are taking my classes, are working in a Windows environment. But this is so not always true. So in this case, I just want to show you through Google's remote desktop, I have my Mac open over here in a window. So I want you to know that I will talk about, as we move through this, just some of the differences, but pretty much if you hopefully have and you know how to install software on the Mac, you'll be fine. It's just a matter of finding the different pieces for the Mac. And you'll see what I mean as we move through this. So VS Code and Git. Now, in this case, there's no written instruction because I'm basically going to show you rather than to tell you. It's just easier. So I am setting right now on a brand new Windows install that has never had these things installed, with the goal is as showing you what you will work through or what you may see on your side. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is install VS Code. So this is pretty straightforward. You go to a new tab, you type VS Code. Really, that's all you'd have to have. You now in this case, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this first option. You have Microsoft. There's a different. This is the ad. You could click on the non-ad one. Shouldn't make a difference. When you click here, what happens is you're going to see the install for whatever operating system you have. You can see that this is supported on Mac, Windows 64, Linux 64. So one of the things, besides just the fact that VS Code, which is a what do I say, a more scaled down version of their full virtual or Visual Studio, and it is very popular. It is, at this point, I've done some research lately, the most popular editor in use today. So it is, if you're using some other editor, I don't require you to use VS Code. I just generally recommend it. But if you have an editor you like, you're welcome to use it. But I suspect, as I've seen in the past, most students will go with VS Code. So I'll just walk you through this. So on my Windows install, I will just click here. It will download the executable onto my local system. It should only take a second. And then on the Mac, I would do the same thing, right? I would, let me just open a VS Code just to show you while we're waiting for that other one. And in this case, the same idea. It's the Mac Universal. Download Mac Universal. And all that means is that because there are different versions of Windows. As a matter of fact, I think we're getting ready to roll to a Windows 11 here, I think in the next couple months. But for Mac, I happen to be on Big Sur, but there are definitely older versions, a little bit older version of Mac. Anyway, we could talk about that, but just FYI. Okay, so you would download this piece. So let me come back here. Oh, not here, actually here, because I already have the file. Now I could just hit show all or just click on it, and this is going to install VS Code. I'm going to bring this over because it went to my second screen, and I have to accept the agreement. Right now, in this case, there's a couple options I could select here. I'm not necessarily, actually, no, I don't think I'm going to do a desktop icon because I'll actually place it down in my taskbar. I like it there as well. I will have it add to the path. Register the supported files. That's cool. Open with VS Code. Not as important to me if it is to you. This just means if you're on looking at the file manager and you see files that are meant probably for code, it'll give you that option. So these options, but this one for sure you want to do. Okay. And this one is optional. So I'll go ahead and do this, install, and then it will do the install process. Now on the Mac side, I think there's similar options. But I don't think you get as many. But you can choose there which of those you want. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit finished here. Good. It's over on my other screen, so I'll bring it over. Okay, so this is, let me just maximize this for a minute. So this is the default installation for VS Code that is on my local system. Now, again, I'm just going to show you this because I think it's a good thing to do. I'll just search for, not VS Code. There we go. And then I will just drag this. Will it not let me drag it there? There we go. I can just pin it to my task, which it should be there. But so I'm just making it a little more accessible here. That's all. So now I go back in here. Okay. So at this point, you're got it installed. And now we're going to actually, before we jump into looking at doing the next piece, I'm going to show you just a little bit. Okay, so in here, if you click around, you'll see that there's some search. Here you can see that there's Git, which we're going to do in a minute, and this cloning opening folder idea we'll see in a minute. Run and debug. I'll show you how to do this. You typically don't use for our class the built-in, but you may. And then in here, there are some really nice add-ons to VS Code. And we'll talk about some as we go through. I think probably the one Prettier is nice as well, a built-in server that we can talk about later. But so what you're doing is you're adding software into your install of VS Code, basically like an extension. Okay, so I'm just going to get out of here, and I don't have a folder open yet, but I'm going to go up to terminal and I'm going to say new terminal. Now on my Windows side, right, it's going to default into PowerShell, which is fine. I could do that. And on my Mac, there's just a built-in terminal. Okay, just to again show you, let me come back over here just to show you. Just trying to figure out where I'm at. Right, so now that I've installed, and I didn't walk you through that, but I just want you to know under in the Mac side as well, you have a built-in, and it's a terminal basically. I'm not sure why that came up. I have to look at that later. I'm not sure why code automatically executes from the folder. Oh, it may be because I was kind of messing around with here earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and close this because this was already installed, but I just want you to see is that terminal here, when you do new terminal, right, you can actually do the default terminal as well. ZSH is the default as well, but we're going to end up installing Git here in a minute, and that's typically on both Windows and on Mac what I will use for terminal. And all that is there's like little different programs, some built in that, or some that come with Git. But on either version, Windows, before you start, see, do you already have it? Now, in my case, I do. Now that's on my Windows side, and so on my Mac side, but on my Windows side, completely new install. I'm guessing I don't have Git, and I don't, which is fine. And now, why would I want you to know this? This is because you may already, if you've done other work or taken other classes, already have a fairly current version of Git. Right? So it's not as important for you to install it, but just to understand the version. Okay, so I just want you to, and by the way, it's just good to introduce you to the terminal because it's something we use in this class. And the more experience you have, now I'll talk about in a little bit how I want you to watch the first part of our Udemy course that we're using to talk more about the commands here, right? PWD for my path, LS for files. Again, the more experience you have here, the better. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, right? And that's my Mac side. So now I'm going to do the next piece, which is I'm going to now install Git. So at this point, you've been using GitHub, right? So GitHub is the website, right? So GitHub is the website that you've created an account on The whole purpose of it is for you to track your code. Now, this hub idea is, again, on the web, but what we want to do is use GIT, which is version control on our local system. So we need to install now the second piece of what we're here to do, which is to install GIT. So similar thing, I'll just do git download here. And then I can go, now again, look what it's doing. It's wondering based on my last commands, or you want to install Mac? And no, I'll talk about the Mac install in just a minute. Okay. So now it does give you here, unlike VS Code, that's a little more sophisticated, I suppose, that you get different operating system already set up for you. In this case, it does show you here, although it does show you you can download it for the other clients. So let me go ahead and start the download for Windows. Automatically says, yep, and it determines what version in this case. Let me go back just to show you that, right? So it's already said, hey, this is probably the version that you want, 2.3.2. And I just will say here on the Mac side will tell you that you need to do something and brew install git. Unless you're somebody who already is familiar enough with the command line in the Mac, I don't recommend brew, because homebrew, if you're familiar and you already use it, totally cool, right? But typically, or you can do it in Xcode. Again, it's not necessarily for folks that have never done this. I don't recommend it, but for folks who are new, students who are new to, and this is the first time they've installed Git, there's actually a nice, and I actually will give you the link here. I'll show you. I already have it up here, installing it. And it shows you in this link, and I'll provide this in the instruction just for the Mac folks so you can take a look at this. Okay, so I guess my point is on the Mac side, there's a couple of options. Even they talk about here installing it if you want there too. But what I like is they also show you, hey, if you just want to download it, which I generally recommend, from SourceForge, and it gives you a link and you can download, let's see, I think it's got the latest one. Yeah, it actually shows right here. And even though it says Mavericks, and they say in their page, if you didn't catch it, you can go ahead and use this version if you have, maybe even the last couple of versions or a little future of this as well. Okay, so I'm going to come back here to my Windows side. Again, I'm switching from my Mac to my Windows, so sorry if that's confusing. So in here, I've already installed it. Okay, so I'm going to, just because I think it's good practice, because I think it's going to update something in VS Code, I'm just going to close VS Code. I'm going to come back to my Windows. I'm going to click here. Now I'm installing Git. Okay, now by the way, I'll just move this over. It says, do you want to allow? Yes, I do. Okay. I love how it's going to my other screen each time, so I have to bring it over, which is totally fine. Matter of fact, let me just minimize this so you don't have to see all this, right? So these are just, now these, you really want to kind of watch as you do this, right? Again, this is Windows. I'm going to tell it where I want it to go, which I do have enough space. Okay, now it's going to default to add a new bash profile. Actually, I'm going to do this, and I do recommend you do this as well, which is to add a new bash profile. Now, if you're proficient with PowerShell and you don't want to use bash, totally up to you. I'm just going to do it for my setup as well, because I'm used to the bash install using it on the command line. So I'm going to hit next. Right, there we go. Okay, choose your editor. VM is while powerful, going to be hard to use. Well, I'm actually just reading this because I've never seen this particular option. Choose default editor. Which editor would you like to choose? So I'm actually going to use nice Visual Studio Code. Okay. Now, be careful here. Again, choose your editor if you're using something besides that. Now, remember, Visual Studio is different than Visual Studio Code. For this class, I recommend Visual Studio Code. And this we're selecting as the default, right? Adjusting the name of the initial branch for that. I'll let Git decide this. This is more of the way we handle what's called branches after you branch. And again, we'll learn more about this in a little bit in this class, not a lot. Okay, I'll hit next, right? And then you can use Git or Git bash only. You can use Git from the command line and also third party. That's another way to do it. So in this case, I'm going to leave it as recommended. And then if I find there's something I need to do differently, I'll figure that out as I go. Typically, the defaults are pretty good. Use the SSLTLD library to get your HTTPS. Yeah, we'll use that. Hit next. We'll leave this as is, configuring line conversions. Many. I'm just kind of defaulting through here. Now use a credential helper. Now this will be helpful because, and this is something that's changed just recently with Git, is that we have to use what's called tokens for passwords, and I'll show you that in the next video. So we're going to go ahead and let Git credentials manage core. I think this will work for what we're trying to do. If not, I'll figure it out. Enable caching, which is man, there's a lot of options. I'm not going to do either of those, and I'll go let it install. So it seems like there's a lot of options here that I haven't seen before because I haven't had to do a fresh install of Git, which is exactly why I did it. But typically what I would say on there, except for selecting VSCODE as your default one, and I'm not going to launch Git bash right now, I'm just going to hit finished. And it says, do you want to open? I'm getting a message on my other screen. Oh, release notes. That's what it was. So it was asking me if I wanted to install the release notes. Okay. Oh, restricted mode. Interesting. Okay. So at this point, we'll do this a little bit later. I'm going to go back to terminal now that I've done this. And I'm going to type git -- version again to see that I don't have it. Oh, well, let's try this. How about if I choose Git bash? How about that? Much better. Okay. So for you power users, I suspect there's just a step there you'll have to take in order to make Git available, and it's probably something in your path. But for most people, I just recommend using bash. And I also, again, do this inside of Mac as well. It just makes life easier. But again, I try not to dictate particularly how students handle their local systems, just because it is your local system and you should have as much autonomy over that as you absolutely can. Okay, so now we've actually done this step. So going back here, what you want to do is, if you've been successful here and you were able to type git -- version on both, let me just show you now. I'm going to go back to my Mac side. I'm not going to walk through this because I already have it. But I have already shown you here, right? The default terminal install. I've also shown you that you have to do a little more work to find the actual install for Git for Mac, but it is available just from a download, or there is Homebrew. Again, I don't recommend Homebrew for new folks to command line. If you're familiar, you're welcome to do that. Okay, but if you've done and saw that you have Git -- version, you show a version, you're good to go. You can hit mark and we'll go on to the next step.